Hey everybody, it's time to finish up the Iliad, and then we'll start the Odyssey tomorrow, and we'll see how far we get into it. I'm not sure how many. I don't remember how many books the Odyssey is in here, but um, we're gonna wrap up the Iliad today, the final three books, and the last couple books we read yesterday, the last few was the tide of the battle had changed because now Achilles had entered the battlefield and he was in a bloodlust over the death of his friend, and he was just a one man wrecking crew to the Trojan army. Um, and the gods were still intervening, and I think at the end Apollo had taken the shape of Hector or somebody and run away and had caused Achilles to chase him, which let the Trojans get back into their gates. And it's like, man, these gods are just intervening so much. Just let them finish it off. So anyway, book 22 here. We're going to read 22 through 25, and then we'll be done with the Iliad today. However, not all Trojans were able to enter the safety of the city. One of them remained outside the walls, Hector. There he stood alone in front of the Scaean gate, spear in hand, waiting. Meanwhile, Apollo had stopped running. He cast off Agenor's appearance and resumed his own. Then mockingly he turned to Achilles and said, "Why are you chasing after me? Can't you see I am a god and that you cannot kill me because I am immortal?" "A god indeed, the most disastrous of all," replied Achilles angrily when he realized he had been made a fool of. "If only I could kill you, Apollo, I would take my revenge on you." Then he spun round and dashed back towards Troy. From the tower, Priam saw him running back. "Hector, my son," he shouted, "come inside the city. Take shelter. Do not stand up to Achilles. Save yourself, and with you save Troy." Hecuba, the hero's mother, also begged and moaned and held out her arms in desperation. But Hector gave no answer. Yes, he had also seen Achilles approaching. He also felt that the supreme moment was close, but he did not wish to go inside the city. He did not want to flee and mar his honor. He could have ordered his troops to retreat earlier, as soon as he had seen Achilles join the battle. But he had not done so, and he would now pay for it. What was to be done? Throw down his arms, surrender, and return Helen back to the Greeks? Hector knew full well that in any case Achilles would not grant him a moment's truce, that he would not accept his surrender, and that he would not have mercy on him. Better to face him then, and at last one would know which one of them Olympus wanted to cover in glory. There's kind of this epic scene here, that's Hector waiting for Achilles, wind blowing. A weighty silence fell on the entire plain, and Hector and Achilles came face to face. Something quite unexpected then occurred. Hector, whose courage until then had been unswerving, was suddenly panic-stricken. Seeing his great rival advance on him, gigantic and menacing, surrounded by a magic aura of light as though the sun glowed through his bronze armor, Hector's heart faltered. He was unable to look at the vision. He was unable to stand his ground. He turned his back on Achilles and fled. Yes, he fled, heedless of the Trojans who watched from the wall or the Greeks who had drawn closer in silence. He fled and circled the walls of Troy 3 times with Achilles at his heels. Meanwhile, at Olympus, Zeus had been weighing Achilles and Hector's lives on his scales and saw that it was Hector's time to die. "So be it," he murmured solemnly. That is when Athena played the last trick. Speeding down to Troy, she assumed appearance of Deiphobus, Priam's son, and caught up with Hector in full flight. "Brother," she cried, "stop! Don't wear yourself out. Let us both confront Achilles. Come!" Out of breath, Hector replied, "Yes, Deiphobus, you are right. Enough of running. Achilles," he shouted, turning around, "it is you and I now. Let us fight, but let the victor return the body of the defeated." Achilles answered, "No, I shall make no pact with you. You are as good as dead, Hector. You shall pay for what you have done to Patroclus." He had barely finished his sentence when Achilles launched his spear. Hector was ready for it and leapt aside, and the lance sank into the ground. "You have missed, Achilles," exclaimed Hector the Trojan. "My turn now," and he thrust his spear, but it bounced off the shield made by Hephaestus. Hector turned around, stretching his right arm. "Deiphobus," he cried, "give me your spear." He stopped short. There was no one about him. He understood and muttered, "Huh, the gods are indeed calling me to death. This is one of Athena's tricks. Well, I shall not die without glory." He drew his sword and lunged at Achilles. But the latter had already raised his own spear, which the invisible Athena had picked up and put back into his hand. Taken by surprise, Hector could do nothing to defend himself. He was struck by the deadly weapon and collapsed to the ground. "You thought you would remain unpunished, Hector?" exclaimed Achilles. "Now the dogs will have your body." "Achilles," implored the dying Hector, "by all that is sacred to you, I beseech you to return my body to Troy." Then death took him. While Troy resounded with cries of lament, the triumphant Greeks rushed forward, gathering around the fallen hero, and savagely thrust their spears. "Ha!" they shouted. "He is softer now than he was in battle." Then Achilles tied Hector's feet to his chariot, and howling, lashed his horses into a gallop. Dragging his rival's corpse in the dust, tearing it apart and defiling it, he drove round the walls of Troy before going back to his camp. No class. He is like school in July. No class. Book 23. All the Greeks had now rejoined their camp, removed their armor, and put down their arms, at last thinking of resting. But Achilles ordered the Myrmidons to remain armed. "Come with me," he added. "We must pay our respects to Patroclus. We shall rest afterwards." His orders were obeyed, and together with his warriors he wept on the seashore, calling out the name of his friend. "I have kept my promise, Patroclus," he sobbed. "I have killed Hector, and I have thrown his body to the dogs." The wailing rising from Troy was echoed by the weeping rising from the sea. Even after the Myrmidons had finally taken off helmet and armor, even after they had fallen to the ground in utter exhaustion, Achilles continued to lament, alone, on the vast beach. The following day a huge pyre was prepared, on which they put the embalmed body of Patroclus. Solemn sacrifices were carried out. Then Achilles set fire to it. "Be happy in the kingdom of the dead, Patroclus. You have been avenged." In total silence, the Greeks watched the flames consume the young hero's body, whose ashes were gathered and placed in a golden urn which was buried by the sea. In the meantime, something strange had occurred. Not one dog had approached Hector's body, which had been thrown in a corner. Apollo and Aphrodite had taken care of the poor mortal remains and protected it from further laceration. Patroclus' funeral was over, but Achilles raised his hand, and in solemn silence he shouted, "Friends, wait! Before you return to your tents, I ask you to honor one more time my beloved friend. In memory of him, I want you, valiant warriors, to measure your strength against one another. In the name of Patroclus, I want you to compete in a contest of skill and power. I shall draw the prizes from the treasures of my war booty." And so a boxing match was suggested. The winner would be given an untamed mule, and the runner-up a splendid cup. The noble Epius stepped forward and challenged everyone by saying in a loud voice, "Whoever wants to fight me can step out, but let your friends stand by to give you a hand when I'll have finished with you." Epius was not boasting. After a brief fight, he knocked down, with a terrific punch, the only man who had accepted the challenge, Euryalus. He was carried unconscious and covered in blood to his tent. Achilles then suggested a wrestling match, offering a huge tripod as first prize, and for the loser, a beautiful slave, well trained in the domestic work. Kind of a weird thing in the middle of this war. Like, all right, guys, let's all fight and wrestle. The contenders were the gigantic Telamonian Aias and the shrewd Odysseus. The latter was shorter and not as strong as his opponent, but no less skilled. Grappling, they both fought for a long time, and neither one was able to bring the other down. The wrestling match dragged on, and the spectators were getting bored. "Let's do this," said Aias. "The first one to lift the other off the ground will be the winner. Agreed?" "Agreed," replied Odysseus. The first attempt was by Aias. He would easily lift his rival off the ground, and he was about to do just that when Odysseus kicked him in the shin. Taken by surprise, Aias dropped to the ground. There was general bewilderment. Such a big man had yielded under Odysseus' strength. It was now Odysseus' turn, but as hard as he tried, he could not lift his giant opponent. Achilles then intervened. "You have both won, and shall receive equal prizes." A foot race then took place, for which the first prize would be an embossed silver dish. The runner-up would be given a well-fattened ox, and the third contender half a gold talent. Moving forward, there was Aias, son of Oilus, followed by the young Antilochus, son of Nestor. And to everyone's surprise, there came Odysseus, tired as he was from his struggle with Aias. From a line marked out by Achilles, the three champions set off running. At once, Aias took the lead, distancing himself from Antilochus, but he could not succeed in outrunning Odysseus, who kept close behind. The spectators standing cheered as the two opponents covered the last stretch. "Help me win, Athena!" prayed Odysseus, and the goddess came to his aid, making Aias trip and roll on the ground just as he was about to cross the finish line. One stride, and Odysseus won the race. "You were helped by a goddess," grumbled Aias, but Antilochus said, "Well, I admit, young as I am, I can do nothing against old Odysseus," and they all laughed heartily. The games continued with a spear-throwing competition. At first, the champions competed in a sort of duel. Whoever succeeded in scratching his opponent's skin and draw a little blood would be the winner. The challenge was between Diomedes and Telamonian Aias. They confronted each other with great zeal, but neither succeeded in wounding the other. The game then became dangerous. Indeed, the contenders' fighting spirit was frightening, and the concerned spectators called for the competition to be suspended and that both be given equal prizes. More spear-throwing challenges followed. Agamemnon and Meriones presented themselves. Before the two of them could measure their skill, Achilles said, "Agamemnon, everyone knows that no one can surpass you in spear-throwing. Then take this copper vase, and to you, Meriones, I give a sturdy lance." All approved, and with this gesture, peace amongst the Greeks was sealed, and the memory of the feud erased. Thus ended the games in honor of Patroclus. Book 24. Last book, guys. Several days went by without any fighting whatsoever. Achilles' grief did not abate. Every morning, after spending the night wandering and sighing on the seashore, he tied Hector's corpse to his chariot and dragged it 3 times around Patroclus' tomb. The corpse of the dead hero did not decay, however, as Apollo had taken pity and protected it. But he was not the only one to pity Hector. The other gods also begged Zeus to put an end to the horrendous butchering on the one side and to Priam's sorrow on the other. Zeus sternly agreed. He sent Thetis to her son to persuade him to return Priam his rival's body, and he sent his messenger Iris to Priam to urge him to go trustingly to the Myrmidons' camp. Hermes would lead him. So with his chariot loaded with precious gifts for the ransom and some linen sheets to wrap his son's body, the old king left the city at night and, led by Hermes, stole unseen into the Greek camp. He reached Achilles' tent where he was sitting sadly with some of his most loyal friends. Priam then stepped out of the shadow and knelt before Achilles. "Achilles," he said, "think of your father. Take pity on my grief. Give me back my son. Look," he added, "here I kiss the hand that killed him." And he took Achilles' hand and kissed it. Achilles was astounded to see the old king in his tent. Moreover, he was moved by his words and his behavior. There was no more anger, nor rancor in his heart, but only sorrow and compassion. He whispered, "Old man, I can see how much you have suffered. But how could you find the strength to come to my tent alone? You know you have put yourself in mortal danger by coming here. Certainly some god must have helped you. Weep no more, Priam. You have no cause for it. Yes, you have not come to me in vain, and nor in vain will you have reminded me of my father. He, too, like you, is destined to suffer, because my fate is to die under the walls of your Troy. Don't cry, old man. Do not grieve any longer." After shedding a few tears, the hero raised Priam to his feet. He then ordered his maid servants to wash Hector's body, perfume it, and then wrap it in the linens brought by the king of Troy. Going back inside the tent, Achilles said, "Take your son. Enough tears for now. Come, eat and drink with me, in honor of Hector." Whereupon the young hero and the old king both sat at the table facing each other, and in great respect of each other. Achilles was strong and brave. Priam was wise and prudent. They were both of equal nobility. At last Achilles asked, "How many days will you devote to your son's funeral?" "We shall mourn him for 9 days, and on the 10th we shall bury him. On the 11th we shall have a feast in his honor. Then we shall be ready to fight again," answered Priam. "Then for 12 days I shall suspend all hostility," said Achilles in a low voice, and as a sign of loyalty he pressed the old king's hand. Soon after, Priam sadly mounted the chariot where his son's body had been placed, and in the great silence of the night he returned to Troy. From the top of the tower his daughter Cassandra recognized him as he approached and shouted, "Trojans, come out and see! Hector is returning to his homeland. Come and see!" They all hastened, and the city's gates were opened wide to let in the king's chariot and its sad burden. Hector's body was laid in the center of a room in the palace. Amid the weeping, the wailing, and the lament arrived the beautiful Andromache. She knelt, looking at her husband's livid face, and whispered, "You have died too young, Hector, and left me too soon. And with me you have left our son. He cannot yet talk, but Hector, I fear he will never live through his youth, now that you are no longer here to defend him." Andromache wept. By her side old Hecuba and the beautiful Helen wept, and throughout the palace and throughout the town the vast crowd wept. But Priam ordered, "Enough now! Bring firewood for the pyre, and you can gather it outside the walls without fear, for Achilles has promised to suspend the war for 12 days. For 9 long days, while the wailing continued, they gathered firewood from the surrounding countryside. They built a gigantic pyre on which Hector's body was finally placed. Then they set it alight. When the last ember of the pyre was put out with the wine, the hero's ashes were gathered in a golden urn, which, wrapped in purple cloth, was then placed inside a tomb and covered with huge stones. Then, according to custom, all assembled in Priam's palace and sat at the funeral banquet. These were the last honors rendered to Hector the horse-tamer. Hector's death did not mark the end of the war, which was yet to last, and it was not even to end with Achilles' death, shot by an arrow from Paris' unerring bow. The destiny of the hero who had chosen a brief but glorious life had followed its course, but Troy still resisted. Troy was to fall by deceit. It was to fall when the Greeks, accepting Odysseus' advice, pretended they were lifting the siege, and on the seafront where their camp had stood they left a gigantic wooden horse. In that horse, which the Trojans mistook for a divine gift, were hidden the most stalwart Greek warriors. In the still of the night they came out of their hiding place, and this time there was to be no salvation for the city. The gates were opened, and the Greeks, sailing back to shore under the cover of darkness, marched into the city inexorably. Massacres and fires marked the end of Troy. Almost all of its defenders were killed, Hector's young son was killed, old Priam was killed, but their memory was to last forever, like the memory of their victors. Achilles would be eternally celebrated and eternally honored, as would be his unfortunate rival Hector, who was killed in defense of his homeland and his people. A truly tragic tale, guys. We're going to pick up the Odyssey tomorrow. Be sure to check out the final questions for the Iliad, and make sure you submit them.